bring our message of condolence to the family of the late president, friends, and the entire nation. Mr. Speaker, when you read the Bible, the book of Ecclesiastes, the Bible says there is time for everything. There is time to be born and there is time to die. Indeed, it was too early, Mr. Speaker, for the late President Mwai Kibaki. Mwai Kibaki leaves behind a positive legacy, Mr. Speaker. He was indeed a family man, Mr. Speaker. From his busy schedule of politics, he found time for his family. And this is a big virtue, Mr. Speaker, that other leaders must emulate, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, secondly, when it comes to the matters of the economy, Mr. Speaker, the President took over when the growth of this economy was at 0.06%. And he managed to drive it to almost 10%, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mwai Kibaki believed in planning. It is said, Mr. Speaker, that failing to plan is planning to fail. Indeed, he's the one who came up with the Vision 2030, Mr. Speaker. The Vision 2030 is the economic blueprint, Mr. Speaker, that all other policies are anchored to. And, Mr. Speaker, in the Vision 2030, the President envisioned Kenya to be a middle-income economy, Mr. Speaker. When it comes to matters of public debt, Mr. Speaker, the President was borrowing wisely. I remember that particular time, Mr. Speaker, when you look at the ratio, the percentage of public borrowing, the GDP, Mr. Speaker, was around 48% to 50%. But currently, as we speak, Mr. Speaker, the borrowing is almost 100%. He was borrowing wisely, Mr. Speaker. The public debt, the burden now is on the Kenyans, Mr. Speaker. We are calling upon the leaders to emulate President Mwai Kibaki. Mr. Speaker, on matters of the taxation, he increased the tax revenue. And, Mr. Speaker, that time KRA had a slogan that kulipa ushuru. He came up with a strategy of ERS, the economic recovery strategy. And this was about wealth creation and employment. Mr. Speaker, I remember that time we had drastic reforms in the banking industry. At that particular time, Mr. Speaker, the cash reserve ratio was low. And the banks at that time in history, they were hawking loans all over, Mr. Speaker. The banks were giving loans to Kenyans at a low interest rate. Mr. Speaker, because we didn't have a lot of domestic borrowing, he had allowed, Mr. Speaker, the SMEs to borrow from the banks. And at that particular time, we salute him because that is the time the economy was growing. There was a lot of money with the SMEs, Mr. Speaker. Employment was created, and we salute for him for that. Mr. Speaker, during this time as the president, there was zero tolerance to corruption. And in every government office you went to, there was that, it was written all over, that zero tolerance to corruption. We salute President Mwai Kibaki because he was committed to the fight against corruption. I had an opportunity to go to his house with the late Vice President Wamalwa, Mr. Speaker. As a young boy, he went to Muthaiga, and I had a chat and had tea with him. I remember very well even Joseph Kamotho was there. And from the communication, he was a humble man. The very first time I went to State House, Mr. Speaker, I was again with the late Vice President Wamalwa. After the installation, Mr. Speaker, in Uhuru Park, we went to State House. And at that time, he was still on the wheelchair, Mr. Speaker. And we salute him, the humility he had as a president, Mr. Speaker, the family man, the help when it comes to the economy. So we call upon the leaders of this country, Mr. Speaker, that we are looking for another Kibaki. A Kibaki who will revive the economy, Mr. Speaker. A Kibaki who will reduce the public debt that is burdening Kenyans. A Kibaki who will manage the cost of living. As we speak right now, Mr. Speaker, the cost of living is very high. The issues of inflation are very high, Mr. Speaker. How I wish that we call upon the next president of this country, Mr. Speaker, who I'm very sure is going to be a Kibaki movement, Mr. Speaker, that is going to respect the Kenyans. He respected institutions. He respected Parliament, Mr. Speaker. He respected the judiciary. And we salute him for that, Mr. Speaker. I'm told even at that time he could call off cabinet if a cabinet minister was indeed invited to come